So I already introduced myself. I'll introduce this presentation now. How Gatsby does high-impact, low-effort UX research, and how you can do that too. That's what I want to talk about today. And just so you can see it written, this is my name and what I do at Gatsby, UX specialist and head of learning also. I think we all probably wear like a few different hats at Gatsby, so those are a couple of the ones that I'm wearing. And then you can follow me on Twitter. I didn't realize this so my middle initial is B, and so Shannon BUX and Shannon Bucks. I didn't realize it sounded like a form of currency, and my brother is now like, you have got to print money that says Shannon Bucks on it. Anyway, so maybe I'll start handing that out as like someday as like a prize for doing usability testing or something. Okay, so we'll talk about 4 things today. Number 1 is, why do UX research on your website? And number 2 is how to do high impact, low effort research. So if you choose to do it, how do you make it really count and be low effort enough to be possible? Number 3 is the top 5 pain points that we're solving right now at Gatsby. And also, some of those are like things that we've already started solving. Some are what we're currently solving now, and I'll also talk about kind of where we're going with what next pain points we're going to try to address through research. And then also the 4th thing we're talking about is how to sign up to be a usability tester. So just a slight preview of that. A lot of the valuable insights we've gotten in how to improve the gatsbyjs.org site and your experience on that website are from people just like you, who've been really awesome. The community has been incredibly helpful, and all of your insights are really valuable, and we really try to do impactful things with what we learn from talking to people. So let's start with the first thing. Why do UX research on a website at all? I kind of want to start with a little story here, which is apparently so I started doing some UX research with Gatsby last September, so like a year and a half ago almost, and I didn't know that it was kind of like rare, I suppose, to do user experience research in an open source project, especially at an early stage. And the way that I found out that it was rare is because I started messaging people on Twitter. I was just like, how do I find people to talk to just see how people are feeling about Gatsby? And I was like, oh, I'll just like look at who's talking about Gatsby on Twitter and just ask them, just see if they're willing to chat with me. And I started asking people, and at a pretty like regular basis, like maybe a third to half of the people thought that I was like scamming them or something. They would be like, who are you? Like, because I would ask them like, hey, I'm working at Gatsby. I want to know what your experience is like, because we're trying to improve the experience, make it easier for everybody. And they just thought I was like some random person. I don't know who they thought I really was. So then I started I started at mentioning Kyle in every single response so that he could like it. And then it was like his little stamp of approval, and people were like, oh, okay, this person is like a real researcher. They're not like some competitor who's just like trying to find out secrets, or I don't know. But in talking to people, they were all like super willing to participate and just so helpful. And also like expressed that they were surprised. They're like, how are you guys doing research this early in a company? Or like, why are you starting it so early? So that's kind of why I wanted to get into like, why is it important to do research at any stage, including an early stage of a product or a company, and also late stages. So there are some reasons that we are why we're doing UX research at Gatsby include, one of our company goals is to create an awesome developer experience, and another one of our goals is to create an awesome user experience. So for the people who are building sites with Gatsby, we want that experience to be really easy and powerful. Just empower developers to do what they really need to do and want to do. And then we also want to make the experience really easy for the end users of websites. So the people who are like actually arriving at anything on the web, what's their experience like? We want that to be awesome too. And there are other people involved in the process too that we want to help. So content editors, kind of like Sam was mentioning in his presentation, developers and content editors and end users are all people that we're serving with Gatsby. So in the service of those goals, we've wanted to do research. But here's a question that you might ask. Can't we just reach those goals without research? Like, why not just build awesome stuff? And yeah, like, why not, why take the time to do research? So there are many reasons that you could talk about. I'd like to just focus on 3. The first one is that I think that UX research ensures that you're doing meaningful work, because you could do work on any part of your product at any time, and research helps you find out what the highest impact thing to work on is. So basically it helps you prioritize. So if you have limited, raise your hands if you have limited time, limited budget, limited resources. I mean, everyone's got limitations, right? I don't know. That'd be really crazy if someone was like, no, I don't have, I have all the people I want. I have all the time I want. So because we all have constraints, being able to prioritize is super important. And doing research can help you prioritize, where are we going to get the biggest bang for our buck in helping us reach our goals. The second thing is that it can save time. If you do research the right way and are focused on those answering high impact questions, then it can help you save time. Because if you spend like several months on a project that doesn't actually solve a real problem, or maybe it solves a problem that wasn't the most important one to solve, or maybe it creates a new problem. Those things they're not unheard of. It happens pretty frequently. That can take up a lot of valuable time and resources. So doing UX research can help you save time, which usually means that you save money as well. Another thing I wanted to talk about, which is kind of the more soft skills kind of side of UX research, it can be really fun and surprising and confidence building, which I don't know if any of you feel like this at your jobs, but anything that I can do that feels fun or surprising or confidence building I want to do that at my job. Because I just think we all are trying to progress in our careers, and we also want to have interesting lives. And it can be really fun to like hear surprising things from your users. So one fun story I wanted to share was there was a guy that was actually looking at our documentation, and he was doing a usability test. This was this was in July, and he lives out in Rhode Island and runs like a coding school kind of training thing for high schoolers, and they do real projects. And anyway, so I was talking to him over video chat, and he was looking at our documentation, and I was asking him to do tasks like, how do you think you would learn how to create a page with Gatsby, and watching how he did it. And then I don't remember how the conversation went this way, but he said something like, oh, it'd be really cool if you guys had a newsletter or something, and we do. And so that clues me into okay, that's something I can ask him about. So I asked, actually, I think Kyle was on the call, and he asked him this. He said, I usually try to have 2 people on each call. I'll get to why that is later. So I think Kyle asked him, how do you think, if we did have a newsletter, well, we'll just tell you now that we do. How would you sign up for it? Like, how would you subscribe? So then we just watched him poking around the site, and he never found the sign up. And so that is like a nice surprise. That was really fun. It was actually fun to learn about, because how often do you get like truly surprised by something in your life? You know, it's kind of like, it can be a little scary maybe, because you're like, oh, this is my baby. I don't want to find out that it's broken or that I didn't do something right. And the flip side of that is it's pretty fun, and it's fun to be surprised. And it's, I think the reason it's fun is because usually you can do something about it. So also, to talk about confidence building, there is a lot of power in having real experiences with your users that leads you to be confident in the decisions you make. So let's say that you're in a meeting and everybody's like debating what the most important features of the next phase of the product are. You can feel confident in knowing that your opinion comes from experiences with users, and that kind of confidence is like solid, because it doesn't come from just like, oh, I just, believe my ideas are good ones. You're like, I know they're good ones. I actually have solid evidence. And also, I think it builds, if you involve a lot of coworkers, like that, one of the reasons I try to have 2 people on each call is because we get to have 2 perspectives on whatever we observed. And then we're even more sure that, like, once we talk about, like, oh, how did that call go? What did we learn? Whatever our conclusions are, we're really sure that they're good ones, because we got to talk it out with 2 people who have different perspectives. And then we also have that extra confidence because we can brainstorm, like, what are we going to do with this information? Because it can be a little bit scary if you're by yourself doing research and you're like, okay, I have like a lot of valuable stuff now. Am I going to be able to share it in a way that's like understandable for everyone? When do I share it? Who do I tell first? So having like your coworkers all involved helps a lot. So that was kind of the why. The first thing we were talking about was, why do UX research at all? So those were the reasons that I do it. And now we're going to talk about the how. So how do you do high impact, low effort projects? Let's focus on high impact projects first. So something I've thought a lot about recently is how do you identify the biggest risks to your product success? Because usually that's how you can know that your project will have a high impact, is whether there is a risk involved in what you're looking at. So I want to make sure I know that we're not talking about market risks. I actually don't know that much about mitigating market risks, so I am not don't claim any expertise on that. I think it's usually the responsibility of other departments, like to strategize, like, are we positioned correctly in the market? What I'm talking about is mitigating product risks, which is more like, are we making sure to meet the expectations of the users of our product and the stakeholders involved? So, for example, I'm going to talk about our current research project, which is working on the gatsbyjs.org homepage. So, out of raise of hands, who here has been to gatsbyjs.org before? So, like, yeah, fair number, most of us. And actually, I'm curious, out of everyone here, who found out about Gatsby from Twitter? I'm just kind of curious about this. Or if you might not remember, it's hard to remember this sometimes. Who doesn't remember how they found out about Gatsby? Like, yeah, a lot of people. They're just like, I don't know. In my dreams, somebody came and visited me. Okay, what about through like a person told you? Okay, so I think, yeah, starting to cover like some of the bases. So we don't actually know how a lot of people find out about Gatsby, because a lot of it comes from like organic Google search. That's what's really interesting, is we're just like, all these people are landing on the homepage because they typed Gatsby into Google. But we don't know like how did they know to type that in? Are they looking for like, I want to see Leonardo DiCaprio in that Great Gatsby film, and then they're like, and I'm a programmer and I found something else. Probably not what's happening. But we don't know. We don't really know. So the interesting thing is that in October we had about, I think it was 100,000 visitors to gatsbyjs.org, and 90,000 of them were like brand new, right? That was like their first time on gatsbyjs.org. So a lot of people, 90,000 new visitors. And we've been talking about like redesigning .org in some ways. And as we, in our like team discussions, talked about this, we realized we had some gaps in knowledge that were pretty risky. So we didn't actually know how well the .org homepage was communicating what we wanted it to about Gatsby. So that's a product risk, because we want to make sure that we are meeting our own expectations for what gatsbyjs.org like accomplishes, and also the user's expectations for when they arrive on the site. And because there's so many new people visiting the site, it could potentially be really bad if we're meeting no one's expectations, or not very many people's, so because it impacts a lot of people. So that's how we determined that this was an important project, because 90,000 new visitors, we don't know what they're experiencing on their first visit to the site, and because it's so many people, we could potentially have a huge positive or negative impact. So that lack of knowledge was something we needed to correct. So we asked 2 questions. The first one was, how accurate are people's first impressions of Gatsby? Just like very simply, like when they land on this homepage, what do they think Gatsby is? The answer, so we did 7 usability tests, for people who had never heard of Gatsby before. And the answer was not super accurate. So that was good to know. No one was like super far off base. I was thinking about this earlier. I was like, it could have been worse. Like, they could have been like, is this like a food delivery company, or? But I mean, they were definitely like in the realm of like, they knew it was a JavaScript framework for the most part. Anyway, so we learned that it could be a lot more accurate than it is. And this also forced us to realize that we need to define, like we were like, oh yeah, we know what we want people to get out of the homepage. But then in group discussions, we realized everyone had like a slightly different faceted opinion about what we wanted people to get out of the homepage. So this also led to really productive group discussions on what do we want people's first impression to be. The second question we asked was, how do people evaluate whether they want to use Gatsby for a project? So there were some actually pretty clear trends with this one, which I was surprised by. I thought everyone would kind of have like a totally different way of evaluating whether they wanted to use Gatsby. So almost everyone wanted to know, how quickly can I set up a site? How does Gatsby compare to my other choices? Licensing information, that one kind of surprised me. I'm not a developer, so maybe that's not surprising to you. It was to me. Is it free, and how well does it scale? So these were interesting because all of these questions weren't really answered by what's above the fold on the homepage. Like, you can't find out that Gatsby is free and open source unless you're just like really clued into the little GitHub icon and you're like, that probably means it's open source. So, it takes a little bit of work to realize this. And then the other interesting thing we learned was that most people, when they scrolled down the homepage and found this diagram, that elicited a lot more excitement and motivation to use Gatsby. It wasn't perfect. There were still like some parts of the diagram people were confused by, but it was more like really sparked interest. So what we learned from this study was what we have above the fold on the homepage isn't quite answering what people need to know in order to like decide to use Gatsby, and we want them to leave with like a first impression that's really clear, and we actually need to define that clearly ourselves. So I forgot to tell you about the demographics of these interviewees. We recruited through userinterviews.com this time because we wanted to find people who had never heard of Gatsby, which I couldn't do through Twitter really as easily. Because usually, I'm like, oh, these are all Gatsby fans. We want to try people who don't know what Gatsby is. And they were all developers, and they all know React or had an interest in learning React. So we tried to, narrow in on people who are like likely to probably be interested in Gatsby. They could be interested in it. Okay. So that was like the first part of high impact projects was making sure you're focusing on like reducing product risk. The second thing is to make sure that your results are actionable. So I learned this through like trial and error. If you gather like a lot of research, it can be really fun and exciting, and you have all these results, and then it's like too much for anyone to like absorb or do anything about. So you're like, if you're doing a lot of research, you can be like really steeped in it and be like, oh, I can like think of like a bazillion like changes we could make, or all these ways to solve all these problems. And the consideration is like, well, do I have enough coworkers who can help me like execute all those solutions? So, and am I sharing this information in a way that's like understandable for everyone? So I just had a few, like just through experience, what I've learned is helpful, and I'm still learning. Involving stakeholders early can really help because the project gains its own momentum, and you don't have to like persuade people to listen to you later. So if people are in on, like if you're doing a usability test, you invite coworkers to come watch. You have like, and then maybe a different coworker comes each time, and you do 5 tests. By the end, you've got like 6 or 7 people, and you all have like a somewhat of a shared understanding of what's going on. And so there's just so much more of a higher likelihood that it will turn into action because you're all pushing for it, and you all understand it together. Having a plan for sharing results, so just thinking ahead of time, like, what are my questions? Is this like focused and narrow enough that I can produce a really like simple document? I would say like no more than 1 page, because even though you could have fascinating research that goes on for like 10 pages, nobody's gonna read it. So I mean, I would read it. You can send it to me. Yeah, lots of people are really busy. So just like short, and you just gotta set up a meeting and do it like right after the research is done. And then I think this is probably obvious, but just gathering as much research as your team can turn into action. I think it's kind of hard to like, we're pretty early stage, so we don't have like super firm measures of like how many resources are becoming available like in a month, because we're small, we're growing so much every week, we can't even like, it would be really hard to do those measurements because our team is changing so much every week. I think at more established companies, maybe you have processes in place where you can like request help for different projects. So it depends on your situation, but just trying to be wise about how much if in doubt, just go as small as you can. Try to choose the smallest project you can, because that will be way easier to turn into action than a bigger project. Okay, so that was like one part of the how. We talked about how to do high impact projects. Now we're talking about low effort projects. Because, it's great to say like, oh, we could do all this research, it'll make so many changes, but I don't have time to do that. Or I'm not a researcher, I don't know how, like I don't have time to become an expert. So here's just like a couple ideas. So recruiting from people you know and doing nice things for them helps a lot. I know this from experience as well. So like just finding somebody in a different department in your company who doesn't actually use your product very much and is kind of like, or like maybe you're building something new in the product. You don't have to like do something fancy to recruit. If you're just starting out, like this is the very beginning of research, any kind of information you can get can be really helpful. So just say like, hey, I'll take you out to lunch and just like, can you just like let me know what you think about this new thing we're working on? That can be really helpful. If your end user is like, if you know somebody who matches the persona of your end user, like a spouse, a child, a neighbor, a friend at another company, it's okay to use your network. You're just trying to get like first impressions, and when you're starting out, anybody that you know might be able to point out really obvious issues that you just can't see because you've been working on the project for so long. So, okay. Another idea is that we just did for this last one was using a recruitment service. It's so easy. I'd never done it before. It was incredibly easy. So it was really low effort for me because it like took like maybe an hour to just set up like this little like, oh, what persona are we looking for? Okay, launch project. Maybe this will work. And then like within a day, I already had 7 interviews set up. So it worked really well. Providing incentives helps. We like provided a, like Amazon gift card. This is not a advertisement for userinterviews.com, by the way. I don't have any connection to them. I did like the experience. Okay, so the other piece of advice is just low effort. This is kind of a repetition of other points, but gathering the minimum data necessary. This can be really funny, but sometimes you only need one person to identify like a super major problem. Like something is just misspelled. The label on a button is like floating somewhere not on the button or something. Like things that you're just like, I thought I would notice something like that, but I just didn't notice. So sometimes really obvious stuff, you don't need to do like thorough research. You just need one person. The standard is like 5 to 7 usability tests if it's like slightly less obvious problems. And then sometimes you need to aggregate a lot of data, but I think this is like important only after you already know about the obvious problems that you can find out through usability tests. So start small as you can. Just do the minimum level of effort required. And then like, if you're doing 5 to 7 usability tests and everyone is like, my experience is perfect, there are no problems, then you move on to do heavier duty research. That hasn't happened in any project I've ever been involved in, so I don't know. I don't know what that's like, but okay, just very briefly, we're gonna go, I feel like I've been talking for a while, which I have, it's been a half hour, so yeah, we've got about 5 more minutes. Top 5 pain points that we're trying to solve at Gatsby this year. These all came out of user experience research, which basically this year consisted of interviews and usability tests, and we're moving into more like gathering like passive research from data in the next year. So the plugin library, anyone use this before? A few people? Yeah. Yeah, so this came out of interviews from super generous open source contributors and people using Gatsby. I just like talked to tons of people on the phone over Skype. And they all were like, oh, it's kind of tricky to author plugins. It's sort of hard to find the plugin I'm looking for. So we built this library. And we're still doing research to improve it. It's definitely, the number of plugins is like a lot higher than it was before. So must be going okay. I think it's going well. We're going to do some more measuring soon. But yeah, if you haven't looked at plugin authoring page and the plugins docs, those are excellent. I've had some really awesome contributors to those documentation. Another thing we worked on was a major pain point was just working out kinks in the tutorial. Everyone loved it, and they just had more suggestions for improvement. So we broke up, we put this part 0 of the tutorial, which is just a little bit more detailed for people who are newer to development on how to set up their environment. And then over on the sidebar, you can see, let's see, number 4, data in Gatsby. Everything below that, it all used to be on the same page. And one person that I interviewed said, he was like, for parts 1 through 3 of the tutorial, I had to drink 1 cup of coffee for each part. For part 4 of the tutorial, I had to drink a lot of cups of coffee. And so I guess it was a lot more difficult, and it took him a lot longer. It was just longer. So we were like, well, maybe we'll break it up into parts and just see if that changes anything. And it increased how many people were looking at that part of the tutorial by a lot. And then also part 8 of the tutorial is new, preparing a site to go live. So it's more about kind of like a step-by-step introduction to some performance enhancements. So that was some enhancements with the tutorial. Also, people often requested, do I have to use GraphQL with Gatsby? Because GraphQL is it can be intimidating, it can be hard to learn, it just is new. So someone wrote a guide on using unstructured data, which is you don't have to use GraphQL in order to use Gatsby. And then at the very bottom of the document, it explains when is it really advantageous to use GraphQL versus when is using just pulling in data via API is this totally fine, good enough. Okay, just a couple more things. We built the starter library for very similar reasons to the plugin library. Just how do I find a starter that meets my needs? And a filterable, searchable library is helpful. Okay, behind the scenes, these documents, a guy named Anthony in Australia worked really hard on these. A lot of people just wanted to know how Gatsby works, and he wrote really thorough documentation on it. So that was one thing. And then finally, the site showcase is a way to find sites that can inspire you for oh, this is possible with Gatsby. So a lot of people that I talk to learn a lot from reading the source code of other sites. And in this site showcase, you can find the source code for completed sites, which is different than starters, which is an incomplete site. So we're still improving all of these things, so welcome feedback on all of it. Yeah, tell me your feedback. It's really valuable to know. And then finally, I just want to talk about how to become a usability tester. So it's fairly simple. You can just go to this web address and sign up for a spot on my calendar. And right now, we're kind of focusing, we're especially interested in talking to people who want to test for preview. So if you're interested in sharing this is what the developer experience is like for preview, or you haven't tried preview yet, you want to go through that while I watch you. I don't know if you want to do that. It's very valuable. And it's also, just to reiterate, usability tests are not for testing the people that I'm watching. We're testing how easy our tools are to use. So I have experiences in testing where people will be like, oh, I'm sorry, I did it wrong, or I am like, no, that's not possible. There is the golden rule of usability testing is the user is never wrong. The software has something wrong with it if you're struggling with it. So I hope you don't feel intimidated at all and can just sign up. Also, if you want to sign up just to do an interview, and just tell me hey, these are our pain points with Gatsby, and these are what we're loving about it. we love to get that kind of feedback too. It's really valuable. It's valuable because it drives the kinds of projects that I just went through. So those tools came directly out of research, and so we really try to use what we learn. I just want to say thank you. I hope you learned something about how to do high impact, low effort UX research, and also how we do it at our company. Thank you so much.